What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. We'll be going over every backfield today, talking about which running backs I'd be starting and sitting this week. Before we do that, of course, have to do the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was among rookie wide receivers who is currently leading the league in air yards per game. And honestly, the answer depends on what site you're using, how you're trying to get air yards, but it's either Justin Jefferson or T. Higgins. They're very close to each other, so I'll accept both, and that means Jacob Cardona and that one guy were the first to guess those two names correctly. Today's stat: among the top 19 running backs in fantasy scoring, only one has fewer than 3 touchdowns. Who is this one running back? All right, Thursday Night Football is back this week, which means we do actually have a game to watch. Unfortunately, it is a pretty gross one between the Giants and the Eagles. Right now, the Eagles are about 4.5-point home favorites, and the total is a pretty low 44.5 points. On the Giants side, we went over earlier this week about how Freeman is now being used as a featured running back. He's playing a ton of snaps. He's seeing virtually all of the running back touches, and he saw 100% of the running back carries last week. The Eagles are usually a brutal matchup for running backs, but they've actually been closer to middle of the pack this year in terms of rush defense DVOA and yards per carry allowed. It's worth noting they faced the Ravens, the Rams, the 49ers, so maybe that has something to do with it. If they had played, not just like the best rushing offenses, they would probably be an above average defense, and they have only allowed the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. So I'm going to say this is a negative matchup, especially as a road underdog and in a pretty bad game environment given the low total. So I think Freeman is like a low end running back 2 this week, or a flex play. Gonna depend on who else you have, but I think you could play him as a running back 2, and I actually will need to do that in one of my leagues. For the Eagles, Miles Sanders will not be playing. He's expected to miss maybe 1 to 2 weeks. We don't really know yet, but not too long with the knee injury. That leaves the backfield to Boston Scott and Corey Clement. The Giants have actually been decent in run defense. And again, this is a game that is just a pretty gross game environment in general. So I don't think you can trust Corey Clement outside of like a 16-team league. And then Boston Scott, to me, is really just a flex play. It's not just going to be Boston Scott stepping in there and getting 85% of the snaps like Miles Sanders does. When Miles Sanders goes down, they use a committee. When Miles Sanders comes back, they go away from a committee and just give him the entire workload. And because of that, unless you're in a full PPR league, I really think he's only a flex play. And even in full PPR, I think it's mainly just flex. And I would honestly prefer a different running back if you have the option. Next up, we've got our makeup game from earlier in the season with Steelers at Titans. This game has a 51.5-point total, and the Steelers are 2-point road favorites, although I think it's going to depend on the site you're using. I have seen line movement across different sites, and I would not be surprised if the Titans close as favorites among most big sites. So this game is pretty easy to break down in general. You've got James Conner, you've got Derrick Henry. You're starting them in all formats. Both I have ranked inside the top 7 running backs this week, and you're not starting any of the other players, so we can just move on. Not even worth talking about anyone else in this game. Start both those guys. Packers at Texans is next. This game has an extremely high 56.5-point total, and the Packers are 3.5-point road favorites. For the Packers, always start Aaron Jones, and he's actually my running back 2 overall this week behind Alvin Kamara, and I'm not touching any of the other running backs on the Packers. For the Texans, David Johnson continues to see a lot of volume. His last 4 weeks, he's seen 15, 18, 19, and 20 touches. That's still only been good enough to have one top 20 finish, though. He does have a few things going for him. This game is currently tied for the highest total in the week. The Texans are home. The spread is close. So while I don't think the Texans will win, they definitely have a chance to. The Packers are also a pretty below average rush defense, ranking 25th in rush defense DVOA, 15th in yards per carry allowed, and have given up the most fantasy points to opposing running backs. I think you're starting David Johnson this week as a high-end running back 2 because of the matchup and the fairly secure workload. I am okay benching him if you really don't like David Johnson, but I think you can trust him in that running back 2 spot this week. Probably not as a running back 1 though. Next up, we've got another game with a 56.5 point total, and that's Lions at Falcons. And the Falcons are currently 2.5 point home favorites. For the Lions, they finally decided to use their best running back. We saw Adrian Peterson gain 58 yards on 16 touches, and then Swift gain 123 yards on 17 touches. This duo also combined for 3 total touchdowns. I genuinely don't understand why they're not featuring DeAndre Swift. He's been significantly more efficient than Adrian Peterson has, and he's a much bigger threat in the receiving game, so he's gonna benefit the offense just by being on the field. Patricia is one of the worst coaches in the league, though, and so we should never assume he's gonna make the smart decision. So while a rational human being would start using Swift more, we cannot assume that Patricia will do that. Because of that, I cannot trust DeAndre Swift, even in an incredible spot. He is like a mid to low end running back 2, but you need to realize the floor is that he goes out there and has 4 touches. I'm not kidding. That's his floor. He could get you 2 points. So you have to realize that. Even in this great spot, they could just ride Peterson for some reason, lose the game by a bunch, and have no idea why they lost. But hopefully they do the smart thing and they play Swift more. I think Peterson is more of a flex play. It's a little bit thin because you're basically just really hoping he gets into the end zone, whereas Swift can kind of get there on the rushing volume, but then also the receptions, because Swift will have more receptions than Peterson, at least on average, unless there's fluky things that happen. But again, Swift, mid to low end 2, Peterson, more of a flex play. As for the Falcons, Gurley is really the only running back you can possibly trust. Other guys are getting volume, but it's not enough to where you're putting them in your starting lineup. This is the dream spot, though. The Falcons have the 3rd highest implied total on the week. The Lions have a bottom 3 run defense. They're home favorites. I mean, you're playing Gurley as a low-end running back 1 this week, and he has a lot more upside than usual because they could legitimately score, 5 touchdowns this week, and he could have 2 or 3 of them. Not saying he's going to, but I think you're starting him because he has that sort of upside. Next up, we've got the first game of the season where Dallas is in a low total game, but I guess that's how things are going to go in the post-Dak Prescott era. The total in this game is a little bit below average at 46 points, while the Cowboys have opened at field goal favorites. The football team is now a 1-point home favorite, which is pretty embarrassing if you're a Cowboys fan. At least Dallas is always easy for us to break down, though. Despite his massive fumbling issues, you're always starting Zeke as a running back 1. I wish they would give Pollard more opportunities, but they refuse to do that, and so we just need to keep starting Zeke and need to keep Pollard as a high upside handcuff on the bench. For Washington, this is a great spot. You always want to play running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, doesn't matter who they are, quarterbacks, anyone playing the Dallas Cowboys, put into your starting lineup. They're slight home favorites now. I don't know what the line's going to end up as, but it's always positive for a running back being the favorite, especially being at home. And the Cowboys defense, they rank 29th in rush defense DVOA, 31st in yards per carry allowed. Gibson is set up to have his best game of the season. We can't know if that's going to happen, but he's set up to do really well. He's had a very stable floor. He's caught 4 receptions over the last few weeks. He's got all of the goal line work, so he's got touchdown upside. He's got yardage upside. I think you're starting him as a mid-range running back 2 this week. As for McKissick, I wish he would go away, but it doesn't look like he's going to. And honestly, in fantasy, he has 7, 6, and 6 receptions over the last 3 weeks, and you can realistically use him in the flex. He is much better in a full PPR league because his rushing upside is very capped. His touchdown upside is very capped, and so in like a standard league, you probably don't want to use him. In half PPR, it's a little bit more thin, but in a full PPR league, you can use McKissick in the flex because, these receptions, if he's going to have 7 receptions, that's start worthy in the flex spot in full PPR league. He will perform better if Washington gets down, but the spread's like 1 point. It's probably going to finish very close, so really anything could happen. Either of these teams could win, and so we can't really just assume one game script is going to happen. Next up, we have probably the grossest game of the week, where the Bills will take on the Jets practice squad. This game opened with a 47-point total, but it's dropped to 45 points, and the Bills are currently 13.5-point road favorites, meaning the Jets are only projected to score 15 0.75 points, which is pathetic. On the Bills side, it's not that the Jets have some horrible run defense. They just lose every game by 1,000,000 points, and so teams are always able to get there off volume. Unfortunately, there's really no one that we can trust in the Bills' backfield. Singletary has looked just incredibly bad over the last few weeks, but I don't think we can trust Moss yet. I mean, I wish he hadn't gotten injured, and I wish that he was getting the workload he had right at the beginning of the season, was growing on that, but he did get hurt, and he is working his way back from the injury, and so we can't trust he's going to go out there and get like 10 touches. And if you can't trust the running backs and get 10 touches, I don't think you can play him. So I would prefer to keep both on the bench, but if you need Singletary in the flex, it is fine this week because, again, they're probably going to win by a bunch, which means they're going to be able to run the ball a ton, and that's going to benefit the guy who gets more touches, which is Singletary. For the Jets, we actually saw what I was hoping would happen last week. Despite what the box score looks like, Michael Pirine actually outsnapped Frank Gore 41-25. Unfortunately, Gore was still given his 15 meaningless touches to Pirine's 9. I think that will start to shift in Pirine's favor slowly throughout the weeks. Will it happen this week where he takes over? Maybe not. Then maybe it goes to like 13-11, and then they kind of tie at 12, and then it kind of splits a little more. So we can't ever try and guess what the Jets are going to do, but it would make sense that slowly they give less and less touches to Gore and more to Pirine. But it's probably a moot point because, I mean, you're not starting either of these two outside of probably like a 16-team league. Next up, we've got Browns at Bengals, and this game is a 50.5 point total with the Browns 3-point road favorites. For the Browns, Chubb is out another week, which means you are starting Kareem Hunt in all formats and no other Browns running back. For the Bengals, this is a negative matchup, but Mixon has touch counts of 31, 30, and 20 over the last 3 weeks, and he now ranks second in carries and 8th in the receptions. I think you're playing any running back getting that sort of volume. I have him as the running back 9 this week, despite the matchup. However, he's not expected to practice the day I'm recording this. I don't have a time machine, so I don't know what's going to happen on Thursday, on Friday, on Saturday. Just pay attention. I think we're going to know. He did return to the game, so I have a feeling he's going to play. But if he's out, I think you basically assume that Bernard is going to get roughly the same workload, but probably shift more of his carries into targets, which is actually a really good thing for his fantasy value. I do think that you're starting Giovanni Bernard as more of a running back 2 if Mixon is out. But again, just pay attention, and it's definitely something you should do if you're a Mixon owner is go out and get Bernard, because if he's not going to practice, he left the game early with an injury, there's at least a chance he's not going to play, and so be prepared. Next up, we've got Panthers at Saints. This game has a 51-point total, and the Saints are a touchdown home favorite. For the Panthers, always start Mike Davis whenever Christian McCaffrey is out, and he will be out for at least another week. This is a very difficult matchup against a top 5 run defense. They're also coming off their bye, talking about the Saints, not the Panthers. So the tough run defense is coming off the bye. That tough run defense is a home favorite by a touchdown, and so not a good spot when you're running back. The thing is, he's just so involved. He has such a nice floor that he is effectively a matchup-proof running back 1 while Christian McCaffrey is out, and I have him as a top 7 running back this week. For the Saints, this is actually like one of the best possible spots. Like I said, they're coming off their bye. They're touchdown home favorites. They're facing a Panthers defense that's allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to the opposing team for the running backs, obviously. And Kamara is my running back 1 overall this week. He could fail, but let's be honest. What are the odds that Kamara gets like less than 12 points in this spot? You're starting Kamara in all formats. Latavius Murray can be started in the flex if you need to. But you got to know that he's going to be very touchdown dependent, and so if he doesn't score, you're going to be frustrated by playing him. But again, it's a really nice spot for the running backs. We've seen a lot of games when the Saints score a lot of points at home against bad run defenses. Those are the spots where Latavius Murray does have his spiked weeks, and so if you need him, I'm okay with it. The next game should be one of the best of the week. We've got Seattle at Arizona. This game has a 56-point total, and the Seahawks are 3-point road favorites, also coming off their bye, just like the Saints are. For the Seahawks, Carson's knee should be good to go following the bye. He should have enough time to fully heal from that injury. The Cardinals aren't a bad run defense. They're fairly average, but they run a lot of plays, and this game has a really high total, so the volume should be there for Carson. And given his touchdown ceiling, given his reception floor, I'd consider Carson a low-end running back one this week, someone you're definitely playing. For the Cardinals, we saw Drake go off against the Cowboys, but everyone seems to do that. We can't expect that to just continue moving forward. He now has 1 reception over the last 3 weeks combined, as they just refuse to scheme him looks. I wish they would, or they would go to Edmonds, or they would do something other than what they're doing. I hate it that they're giving him 17 or 18 carries, no targets, and they bring Edmonds in near the end zone. They bring Edmonds in on third downs and give him targets, but not enough looks for Edmonds to really be trusted. And so it's a really frustrating situation. Hopefully, someone just takes over. Whether they give all the looks to Drake, whether they stop using Drake and give them all to Edmonds, I really wish one of them would get more work. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And so I think that if they fall behind, Drake could do poorly, but I think Drake should have a solid enough game where you're starting him as running back 2. And then Edmonds, he's seeing really good touches, the high value touches. It's just that it's not enough total volume to be trusted yet. I still think he's one of the best possible bench pieces because he is a running back 1 every week if Drake went down, but that's not happening yet, and so you got to keep him on the bench. Chiefs at Broncos. Up next, this game has a fairly average 47-point total, and the Chiefs are 9.5-point road favorites. For the Chiefs, I think Clyde got a little nervous about his job security after the trade, and he responded by rushing for 161 yards and adding 4 receptions for 8 more yards. He also somehow managed not to score again, which is kind of crazy, although he did have a touchdown called back by something that was not his fault. If Bell is inactive this week, Clyde is a must start yet again. If Bell plays, then it adds more risk, and I think that you could consider not playing him, but let's be honest. Do we really think that they're going to trade for Bell, watch their rookie first-round pick go for 169 total yards, and then be like, nope, let's just throw Bell in there for a ton of touches? I do think once everything is played out, they are going to use Bell on a lot of third downs and a lot of red zone packages. But right now, he's probably not going to have that large of a role, and he's probably more of a problem for Darrell Williams and these ancillary pieces that are getting a few targets, a few carries. I think Bell kind of takes that sort of role to start, and then they ease him in more than that. So for this week, I think you kind of just keep rolling with Clyde. I have him as a running back 13 overall, and I just don't think that you can trust Bell. I don't think you need to. Just keep Bell on the bench, see what happens. You've got a really high upside player. If Clyde ever went down, Bell is just a monster, but he could have a role regardless, but just keep him on the bench, see what happens there. On the Broncos side, I'm assuming Melvin Gordon's going to be back, and if he is, then this is a pretty gross spot. The Broncos have the second lowest projected team total of the week at just 18.5 projected points. And the most likely outcome is that they're going to kind of split the work between Gordon and Lindsey. I would probably bench both of them while they're both active. But if we were to say that Gordon would be out, well, then I think Lindsey is a really nice play as a running back 2 or a flex. But while they're both active, I want to see it. We still really haven't. This is week 7, and we still kind of don't know how this backfield is going to look while they're both healthy. So I would prefer to just see what's going to happen and move forward after that, especially since this is a really, really bad spot. Even playing at home, they're massive underdogs, barely going to score any points. I just don't think you'll need to. But if you have to, I guess fine, throw one of them in the flex. I'd prefer not to, though. Next up, we've got the 49ers at the Patriots. This game has one of the lowest totals on the week at just 44.5 points, and the Patriots are currently 2.5-point home favorites. For the 49ers, we saw Mostert get placed in the IR with an ankle injury, meaning the backfield will be down to McKinnon, Jeff Wilson, and JaMycal Hasty. McKinnon has not looked great these past few weeks, but he'll likely see the most snaps among these 3. Jeff Wilson will probably see a lot of the red zone opportunities. We'll probably see Hasty mix in here and there. Maybe they get him more run, but we can't possibly know. I don't think you can trust Wilson or Hasty. And I really would prefer, honestly, not to play McKinnon either. The Patriots have a middle-of-the-road run defense, but they're still not a team you're looking to attack. They're probably going to focus on taking away George Kittle. It's unlikely they'll be able to get much going through the air, so it's certainly possible to lean on the run game, but I have a hard time trusting any of these running backs. Again, low total, road underdogs. If you need to play McKinnon in the full PPR league in the flex, go for it. I would prefer to bench all of them. As for the Patriots, kind of a similar spot. I mean, I don't really trust any of them. James White has the most secure role, and he's the best in a full PPR league, but even he is really only a flex play at best. Harris could be a desperation play in a 14-team league, but you gotta realize his floor is like 1 or 2 points. And all of these running backs have a very capped upside in terms of touchdowns because of Cam. Whenever they get close to the end zone, a lot of the time Cam's just going to run it in, and that really, really hurts when you know your running back is probably not going to score unless he has like a 30-yard rushing touchdown. And if he's not getting many targets because those all go to James White and they also don't have that much of passing volume, I mean, what's the upside for guys like Rex Burkhead and guys like Damian Harris? It's not that high. So I think they're more reserved for 14-team league plays and honestly even a flex in that format. Jaguars at Chargers is up next, and this game has a 49-point total with the Chargers 7.5-point home favorites. For the Chargers, Justin Jackson outsnapped Joshua Kelly 42-25 last week, and while that could change coming off their bye, Jackson did look like the better running back, and I would expect a similar split moving forward. That split did result in Jackson seeing 20 touches, with 5 of those coming through the air. This week, the Chargers take on a Jaguars defense that ranks 22nd in rush defense DVOA, 28th in yards per carry allowed, while allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the running back position. The matchup and the projected workload makes Jackson like a low-end running back 2 this week, and it makes Kelly a viable play in the flex, but by no means someone that you need to be playing. On the Jaguars side, James Robinson has been playing like 60 to 70% of the snaps, and he's also seen his touch counts go from 17, 21, 18, 16 over this last month, so he's got a very secure workload. He's getting a lot of that workload through the air too, which is really nice for the floor. He is getting some looks in the end zone. He's getting a lot of touchdown opportunities, and so I think he is just a really, really solid play. It's just that the Chargers have a fairly decent run defense. I'm not going to say the Chargers have a great run defense. They've definitely underperformed this season. But when you look at James Robinson, he is still a touchdown road underdog against a run defense that, while I said it's not great, it's still solid. You know, it's not terrible. So I'd be starting him, but it's more of like a mid to high end running back too. And I would realize that it's just not a good spot. So don't be shocked if he has like 17, 18 carries or touches, I guess. But it only goes for like 12 points. The upside, I think, in this spot is a little bit lower than usual. The Sunday night game will be Bucks at Raiders. The Bucks are 3-point road favorites, and this game is a 53-point over-under. On the Bucks side, Ronald Jones has 3 consecutive 100-yard rushing games, and while he's not a pass-catching back by any stretch, he is getting a few looks each week. The tough part with Jones is that we don't know their plans with Fournette. You know, if we get confirmation that Fournette is either out or not going to be used like we've gotten in the last 2 weeks come Sunday, then I think Jones is a really good play. But if Fournette is expected to get a workload, it's a much more difficult decision. As of right now, I'm assuming they're going to keep rolling with Jones and not use Fournette a ton. And if he is active, he'll have a very small role. And if we get news that contradicts that, I'll adjust the rankings accordingly. But until that happens, I will be having him as a low-end running back 1 this week, especially since the Raiders rank 31st in rush defense DVOA, 22nd in yards per carry allowed. And again, he's a favorite in a game that has a relatively high total. And like I said, aside from Jones, I mean, I'm not trusting Fournette. There's no way you're playing Vaughn or McCoy. On the Raiders side, it is a very, very difficult matchup, probably one of the more difficult matchups, being a road dog against one of the best run defenses in the league. But you're always starting Josh Jacobs and no other running back on the team. Final game of the week will be Monday Night Football. Unfortunately, it's a pretty gross matchup between the Bears and the Rams. two teams that have, a lot of wins. I think they combined for what, like 9-3 as a record, but does anyone really want to watch this game? Probably not. Game's got a pretty low total, 45 points. The Rams are 6-point home favorites. For the Bears, David Montgomery continues to see about 85% of the snaps, which is nuts, and he's just getting a featured workload, had another 23 touches on Sunday, but yet again, he did very little with them. This is actually a pretty decent matchup since the Rams are a bit of a run funnel. They're not a bad run defense, but they're just so good against the pass that teams kind of just choose to run on them. But as a 6-point road dog in one of the lower total games of the week, I can only rank Montgomery as like a low upside running back 2, someone you probably have to play, but you're not pumped about it. For the Rams, there's no one you can really trust at this point besides Henderson. I mean, you can't start Akers, you can't start Brown, so it's only Henderson. And even Henderson, it's a little bit tough to trust at times. The Bears have like an average run defense, and again, the total's kind of low, so I think you can play Henderson in the flex because he's clearly going to get the first looks. They really do play with a hot hand approach, and so if he's going to get the first opportunities, he has the best chance of scoring the touchdown. He's got the best chance of getting like 15 to 16 carries, and because that's the case, again, you can play in the flex. I'm perfectly comfortable. If you're like, oh, but I have other players I'd like to play there, play him, because I don't think you need to start Henderson at all. So that's a breakdown of every backfield in week 7. If you want to see my exact rankings on every single player, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.